Have you ever stopped to think that some houses aren't just bricks and walls, but veritable vaults of dark secrets? Well, what if I told you there's a mansion where an entire family disappeared without a trace? And to this day, no one has been able to explain what really happened. Before we continue on this journey, tell me, are you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, take advantage now, like it, and comment what you think. It really helps in helping stories like this reach more people. Many people believe that every mystery has a logical solution, but this mansion proves exactly the opposite. The more answers we find, the more questions arise. It's as if the case itself was designed to deceive us. A carefully crafted plot to confound even the most experienced investigators. What if I told you that perhaps the family didn't disappear, but chose to disappear? The controversy begins precisely there. What appeared to be a cruel crime may in fact have been a masterstroke. A theater staged to mislead enemies and manipulate anyone who dared to investigate. Imagine living in a world where nothing is what it seems, where every symbol, every letter, every noise hides not only clues, but mental traps designed to make you doubt even your own logic. In this video, I, John Spencer, will take you step by step through the most intriguing investigation of my career. You'll discover secret codes, hidden symbols, and twists that defy explanation. Get ready. This isn't just a mystery story. It's a lesson in how the truth can be manipulated, and how, without realizing it, we can be pawns in a much larger game. Whenever I come across an enigmatic case, I like to start at the root of the story. And the root, in this case, is the old mansion built in the late 19th. At first glance, it looks like just another old house, with worn walls and windows creaking in the wind. But when you look closely, you notice that every brick holds memories that don't want to be forgotten. It's as if the walls whisper secrets to anyone brave enough to listen. This mansion was built by one of the most influential families of the time, known for both their wealth and arrogance. It always struck me how power and mystery went hand in hand. They weren't just successful merchants, but people who cultivated an aura of exclusivity, almost inaccessible to ordinary mortals. Interestingly, the more they isolated themselves, the more rumors grew around them. Delving into the past of a place like this is like leafing through an old book with missing pages. I discovered that the mansion was the scene of lavish parties, but also of intense fights that spilled into the hallway. The servants, many of them elderly when I interviewed them, spoke cautiously, as if they still feared some kind of retaliation. This fear, even decades later, made me realize this was no ordinary family. And do you know what intrigued me most? It wasn't just the grandeur of the building, nor the Gothic details on its facade. It was the heavy silence that hung there, as if every stone was aware of what it had witnessed. I always say that a place holds the energy of those who lived there. And in that mansion, the energy was dense, almost suffocating. Little did I know that this was just the prelude to something much greater. Whenever I think of the mansion, I can't separate its image from the family that lived there. The patriarch, a respected and feared businessman, was seen as a calculating man capable of turning any opportunity into profit. His wife, on the other hand, was known as the sensitive soul of the house, devoted to her children, but with a look that, according to some reports, hid a constant fear. The two young heirs completed the picture, bringing a certain innocence to a home marked by invisible tensions. What strikes me most about this case is the contrast between the public image and the whispers of the neighborhood. While many admired the family's prosperity, others spoke of hidden secrets, illicit dealings, and internal disputes. One thing I've learned from life: not all that glitters is gold, and not every happy family in the portrait is actually happy behind the scene. Sometimes, what society applauds hides a pain that few have the courage to expose. One stormy night, this family simply disappeared. No goodbye letters, no trace of their travels, no indication that they planned to leave. Imagine arriving home in the morning and finding dinner still on the table, the candles half burned, and no sign of life. That's exactly what the neighbors reported when they went in to check on them. A void so glaring it hurt. I always say that a mass disappearance carries more questions than answers. Where were they? Were they fleeing from something? Were they victims of an elaborate crime? Or did they stage the whole thing to throw off their enemies? Every hypothesis seemed possible, and every clue led to a dead end. But there was something between the lines, a hidden detail, that made me believe this disappearance wasn't just a coincidence. As I began to investigate further, I realized that the family's last night had left subtle traces, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Some neighbors claimed to have heard muffled screams amid the roar of the storm. Others reported seeing unusual lights flashing in the mansion's windows, as if someone were using flashlights to communicate. Details that, in isolation, might have been dismissed, but taken together formed an intriguing pattern. One of the most striking accounts came from an elderly woman who lived across the street from the property. She described hearing a metallic sound, like the dragging of chains, shortly before midnight. Curious, isn't it? The problem is that this same woman had a reputation for confusing old memories with recent events. The question that haunted me was she mixing up memories, or had she actually picked up on something that others missed? There were also those who claimed to have seen a solitary figure walking through the garden, dressed in black, minutes before the rain fell heavily. Some swore it was the patriarch. Others said it looked completely strange. This divergence made me uneasy. After all, when witnesses don't reach a consensus, either the facts are being manipulated, or everyone saw exactly what they were supposed to see, a figure designed to mislead. Gathering these records, I realized that the disappearance was not an impulsive act, but something carefully orchestrated. The lights, sounds, and figures seemed like pieces of macabre theater. And as with all theater, there's always a script behind it. It remained to discover whether the family were the creators of this spectacle, or merely tragic characters in a play written by unknown hands. And it was at this point that I found the first mysterious letter. When I stepped into the mansion's dusty corridors, I never imagined I'd find something so disturbing. Among locked drawers and yellowed books, letters were scattered in unlikely places, inside shoes, behind paintings, under loose floorboard. What caught my attention wasn't just their contents, but the fact they were hidden as if someone wanted to ensure they would be discovered by anyone with the patience to search. It was almost a game, and I had just been invited to play. The letters didn't contain ordinary text, but strange symbols, sequences of numbers, and seemingly disconnected sentences. At first glance, they seemed like meaningless scribble. However, I learned early in my career that when something seems like a jumble of chaos, it's because there's a hidden logic waiting to be revealed. And I confess, my investigator's heart fluttered at this challenge. Who hasn't felt that butterflies in their stomach when they realize they're about to decipher something no one has managed before? In some of them, the symbols resembled substitution codes, where letters are replaced by other symbols. In others, there were numerical references that referred to specific pages of old books in the house's library. It was as if each letter were a piece of a larger puzzle, and I couldn't help but wonder, if these messages were left for someone, who would the recipient be? Family? An enemy? Or me? Decades later, by some strange twist of fate, what fascinated me most was their intentionality. They weren't hurried notes, but works of patience, handwritten in a firm handwriting. This led me to believe that before the disappearance, there had been meticulous planning. Perhaps those letters were both a cry for help and a carefully laid trap. And it was in this labyrinth of codes that I realized each clue led me to something even darker, something hidden in the shadows of that silent mansion. Deciphering codes has always been a passion of mine. When I held those letters for the first time, I felt the same thrill that accompanied me in other cases, where the secret was hidden behind enigmatic symbols. The first detail I noticed was that each letter used a different pattern, as if the family or whoever wrote them wanted to filter out the curious. Only someone persistent would have the patience to decipher everything. And modesty aside, persistence has always been my middle name. I started with the simplest, replacing letters with symbols. It was almost like an invented alphabet, but repeating itself in different passages. With a little logic, I managed to piece together the first words, "Don't." From then on, I understood that the messages weren't just secret plots, but warnings. It was as if the house itself was whispering to me, "Be careful, John. You're entering dangerous territory." This kind of detail is what differentiates a common mystery from a riddle that can change everything. Other codes were even more intriguing. I found series of numbers that, when associated with the library, indicated pages of specific books. In one of them, the hidden phrase read, "The key doesn't open doors but truths." Now this wasn't just poetry. It was an invitation, a direct challenge for me to keep following the trail. Whoever wrote it knew the mind of an investigator, and knew how to pique my curiosity to the limit. And then there were the impossible codes, or at least it seemed that way at first. Sequences of symbols reminiscent of dead languages, as if someone had drawn inspiration from ancient tongues to create an indecipherable labyrinth. I spent sleepless nights with these papers before me, trying to connect each line to something familiar. And the further I progressed, the more I realized the answers were scattered throughout the mansion, hidden in places I hadn't yet dared to explore. In every old mansion, there's always a portrait gallery, and this one was no exception. Among the dusty paintings of proud ancestors and bucolic scenes, there was one painting that stood out, the portrait of the missing family. At first, it seemed like just another ordinary work of art, but my instincts told me otherwise. My mother's gaze, painted with such realism, seemed to follow my every step, as if trying to tell me something words couldn't reveal. I decided to examine the painting more closely. The frame, decorated with gold details, had subtle scratches, almost as if someone had tried to remove it in a hurry. I used a small ultraviolet flashlight, one of those tools I always carry with me, and that's when the unexpected happened. Under the light, almost invisible inscriptions appeared, scattered across the bottom of the canvas. Short, disconnected phrases, but all referring to the same idea: look below. The feeling in that moment was indescribable. It was as if I had peeled back an invisible layer of history, revealing secrets hidden for decades. Touching the bottom of the frame, I realized there was a hidden cavity. Inside, a small, carefully folded piece of paper. The handwritten words read, "The truth lies where no one dares look." Now, this wasn't just a clue, it was a direct provocation. I felt as if I were participating in a silent dialogue with someone from the past. Someone who, when painting that picture, knew that at some point someone like me would appear to decipher the mystery. But if the painting held such well-hidden secrets, imagine what else the mansion might reveal in its shadowy corners. It was inevitable. Each clue seemed to push me deeper into an abyss, where occult symbols and secret societies began to take shape. No investigation is complete without delving into the uncomfortable secrets everyone tries to sweep under the rug. And the family of the mansion, despite its prestigious facade, was mired in controversies that echoed throughout the city. The patriarch was known as a ruthless businessman, but behind the contracts were rumors of bribery, document forgery, and even involvement in smuggling, things that at the time, few dared to openly confront. I spoke with former partners and realized they all had a poorly told story. One said the patriarch had misled investors. Another mentioned that rivals mysteriously disappeared after business disputes. This pattern of coincidences never convinced me. In my experience, where there's smoke, there's almost always fire. And in this case, the fire seemed too big to extinguish without leaving a scar. The matriarch, though seen as a refined woman, was not free from harsh comments. Some said she had extramarital affairs. Others spoke of an unstable temperament. Her children, though young, bore the heavy burden of carrying on the family empire. The weight of inheritance can often be crueler than poverty itself. Stories of fortune turning into a curse are not uncommon. And the more I investigated, the more I understood that this family wasn't just a victim of rumors. There were documents, contracts, and even letters from rivals that pointed to serious intrigue. If the disappearances were linked to these controversies, it meant I was dealing with something much bigger than a simple mystery. After all, where there's power, there are always enemies lurking. And in this game, secret societies could be the missing piece. During my searches through the mansion's most forgotten rooms, I began to find curious markings. They weren't random scribbles but precisely drawn symbols, carved into furniture, doors, and even hidden under antique rugs. Triangles, circles, five-pointed stars, nothing that could be attributed to chance. Many people's first reaction would be to label it all as occult stuff, but to me, it had the appearance of a visual code. I remembered previous investigations in which secret societies used similar symbols to recognize each other. Some carved marks on stones, others on parchments, but the logic was the same. Only those who knew the meaning could interpret them. In the case of the mansion, the symbols seemed to be organized like a map, a hidden route leading to a specific point. And let's face it, when someone goes to the trouble of spreading messages like this, it's because the stakes are high. With each new symbol I discovered, I felt as if I were being tested. It was like playing an invisible game of chess against an opponent who no longer physically existed, but who seemed to have left each piece strategically positioned. This adversary could have been the patriarch himself, or perhaps someone even more influential. And the idea that the family was involved with occult societies would explain many of the controversies and enemies surrounding them. But the question lingering in my mind was, were these symbols merely ornaments of an eccentric belief, or did they convey practical instructions? After all, it's one thing to adopt symbols to impress, quite another to use them as the key to a real secret. And from what I already had in my hands, these signs weren't there by chance. Something told me the answer lay hidden in the most inaccessible corner of the mansion, behind a door no one dared open. From the first moment I set foot in the mansion, I noticed a room upstairs that seemed different. The door was more reinforced than the others, with solid hinges and an old but still sturdy lock. Curiously, even after decades of abandonment, no one in the neighborhood claimed to have entered it. It was as if the place had been deliberately forgotten, preserved like a closely guarded secret. I spent hours observing every detail of that door. There were subtle scratches in the wood, as if someone had tried to force it open without success. Just above the lock, I noticed symbols similar to those I'd found elsewhere in the mansion, only here they were more carefully engraved, almost like a signature. It was at that moment that I wondered, what could a family possibly have that was so important that it would hide from everyone, even its own servants? After many attempts, I managed to open the lock using tools I always carry with me. The creaking of the door echoed through the hallways like a muffled scream, and when I finally entered, I felt a chill that didn't just come from the room. The room was intact, as if sealed in time, furniture covered in sheets, books stacked on shelves, and a strong smell of incense permeated the walls. There was also a chest in the corner, locked with an even more enigmatic lock. There I realized it wasn't just a simple locked room, but a space reserved for something much larger. It was as if the room were the beating heart of the mystery, the convergence point of all the clues I'd followed so far. And as I approached the trunk, I had the distinct feeling that the secret hidden within wasn't just about the family, but about something that could change the entire course of the investigation. In any investigation, following the money trail often reveals more than 1,000 testimonies. That's exactly what I did with the mansion case. While combing through public records, I noticed something strange. The family inheritance didn't match the declared assets. Part of the fortune simply vanished, as if it had evaporated into thin air. This detail deeply intrigued me, because money isn't lost, it's transferred, hidden, or stolen. I spoke with lawyers at the time, and discovered that official documents contained suspicious gaps, incomplete wills, interrupted transactions, and unsigned contracts. It was as if someone had deliberately deleted important passages, leaving just enough to confuse anyone curious. I've seen this kind of move before. When you want to hide something big, you create a bureaucratic smokescreen. And I can assure you, few curtains are as dense as those in the legal world. One detail caught my attention even more. Some of the family's assets had been registered in the names of companies that in practice didn't exist. They were shell companies, created only on paper, a trick still used today by those who want to embezzle large sums of money. If the family had enemies, perhaps this hidden money was the reason for all the conflict. After all, in cases like these, the dispute is never just about material goods, but about power. The question that plagued me was, did the family themselves orchestrate the disappearance to flee with this hidden fortune? Or had someone discovered their tricks and decided to act first? With each clue, I felt that the missing money wasn't just an accounting detail, but the key to understanding the true reason for the disappearance. And just as I began to piece these pieces together, a new character in the story decided to show up. No case remains completely silent. There's always someone who saw, heard, or felt more than they'd like to admit. In the enigma of the mansion, that person was the former butler, an elderly man, his posture bent by time, but still carrying a weight in his eyes that couldn't be ignored. From the beginning, I knew he held more than he was willing to reveal, as if he were a prisoner of a secret that had stayed with him his entire life. When I met him, he hesitated to see me. To each question I asked, his answers were short, almost curt, as if he were measuring each word so as not to betray himself. But there was something curious. His silence spoke more than any sentence. The way he looked away, the trembling in his hands, the long pause before denying any knowledge, all of this betrayed the deep memories buried there. And I knew from experience that all it takes is the right question to open a breach. In a moment of carelessness, he blurted out a phrase that sent a chill down my spine. Some doors shouldn't be opened. He didn't say anything else, but that fragment echoed in my mind. For a man who had served his family for decades, it wasn't just a rant, but a warning. His tone carried fear, the kind of fear that only arises when witnessing something beyond logic. I left with more questions than answers, but also with the certainty that the butler knew much more than he was willing to reveal. Perhaps he had taken an oath, perhaps he had been threatened, or perhaps he was complicit in something he never dared confess. In any case, that sentence opened a new chapter in the investigation. If some doors shouldn't be opened, I needed to find out exactly which ones and why. In investigations like this, personal objects are often more revealing than any testimony.
That's how I found my mother's diary, hidden behind a false wall in her room. The notebook, already yellowed with age, had pages stained by humidity, but still preserved delicate, consistent handwriting. Opening it, I felt like I was invading the mind of someone living under constant tension, as if each word were a pent-up outburst. In the first few pages, she described the daily routine of the house, describing her children with tenderness, and her husband with a mixture of admiration and trepidation. Up until then, it seemed like just an intimate account of a woman of the time. But as I progressed, the tone changed. Words like fear, whispers, and shadows began to surface repeatedly. It was clear that something in the mansion was tormenting her, something she couldn't share with anyone except those silent pages.
One passage in particular caught my attention. "He knows we're being watched." This phrase, without context, leaves room for countless interpretations. Was it paranoia? Or a warning that the family was indeed being watched? The scariest thing was realizing that even within her own home, she didn't feel safe. There were passages where she spoke of doors closing by themselves, footsteps in the early morning, and symbols appearing in places no one had been. The more I read, the more I understood that the diary wasn't just an intimate record, but a kind of emotional map. Each page revealed a new layer of fear, distrust, and foreboding. It was as if the mother had foreseen the coming tragedy but was powerless to prevent it. And just when I thought I had it all figured out, I found phrases written in Latin, as if she had resorted to another language to hide what she truly feared. When I came across the Latin phrases in the diary, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was unusual for someone of that time, especially a housewife, to resort to such an ancient and erudite language for no reason. Some passages were excerpts from prayers, others sounded like curses, but they all shared a tone of supplication. It seemed she was writing not just to record, but to protect herself and her children from something that surrounded her invisibly. I deciphered one of them carefully. Quod ladit, revelabitur. What is hidden will be revealed. It was not just a pretty phrase, but a warning loaded with intent. Another said, noli fider, don't trust. The repetition of that expression put me on alert. After all, who didn't she trust? Her husband? Her servant? Or something much bigger, connected to the occult symbols I had already encountered around the mansion? I couldn't help but recall previous cases in which victims, about to face something tragic, resorted to coded languages as a way to leave messages without attracting attention. Latin, in this sense, was perfect. A little understood language, capable of hiding secrets in plain sight. Perhaps she knew someone would review the diary, and wanted to ensure that only attentive eyes willing to decipher would grasp the gravity of the situation. These seemingly isolated phrases connected to the mysterious letters and symbols scattered throughout the mansion. It was as if all the clues pointed to a single network of hidden meanings, a carefully woven web. And the deeper I delved into these Latin words, the more I felt I was not merely translating a dead language, but unraveling a conversation between the living and the shadow. The next step would be to confront that which could not be explained by reason alone. The inexplicable noises echoing through the house. Few things test an investigator's sanity as much as unexplained sounds. The mansion, already imposing with silence, seemed to come alive as night fell. I walked through the hallways and suddenly, footsteps echoed right behind me. Turning, nothing. Doors creaked as if opening, but all remained closed. It was as if the house wanted to toy with me, testing my courage at every turn. I remember one night in particular. I was in the library analyzing occult symbols when I clearly heard a childish laugh echoing down the hallway. The thing is, the house was empty, completely uninhabited. The sound was clear, impossible to have been a figment of my imagination. I felt my stomach churn, but also that irresistible urge to follow the trail. A self-respecting investigator doesn't shy away from the inexplicable. He even stares at the shadows. I later spoke with local residents and discovered I wasn't the only one hearing strange things. Many reported whispers coming from their windows, even decades after the family's disappearance. Some said they felt as if someone were watching them when passing by the mansion. These accounts, combined with my own, reinforced the idea that there was something active in that house, something that stood the test of time. It's curious how sound can be more disturbing than sight. A shadow can be explained by light, but a noise that infiltrates the senses and defies logic. And the deeper I delved, the more certain I became that these sounds weren't mere coincidences. They were signs, evidence that something was hidden there, perhaps a physical clue masked by a sensory spectacle. And it was precisely along this line of reasoning that I found an intriguing object, a key that seemed to unlock nothing. Among the many objects I found scattered throughout the mansion, there was one in particular that stuck with me. An ancient, heavy iron key, carved with an almost artistic design. The strange thing was that despite its size and grandeur, no lock in the house seemed to match it. I tried door after door, drawer after drawer, even hidden chests. Nothing. It was as if the key had been made for something that didn't exist. In my career, I've learned that when an object doesn't fulfill its apparent function, it's because it hides a greater purpose. I began to examine the key more closely. I noticed small, almost invisible inscriptions along the handle, symbols similar to those I'd found elsewhere in the mansion. It wasn't just a key, it was a code in itself, a riddle disguised as an everyday object, waiting for the right investigator. It was then that a memory of an old case in Vienna came to mind. There, a family also used fake keys as a way to transmit secret messages. The key didn't open doors, but it contained coordinates that led to hidden compartments. When I compared the symbols on the key with those on the cards, I realized there was a clear connection. Together, they formed a sequence that pointed to something larger, perhaps even a map. This discovery changed the course of the investigation. It was no longer a useless key, but a purposeful artifact, designed to mislead the curious and guide only the persistent. And if that key didn't open doors, it certainly would unlock truths. I just needed to follow the path indicated by the symbol. But before moving forward, I discovered that the family's disappearances might not be an isolated case. There were records of people from the region who also vanished without a trace. As I delved into the city's ancient archives, I realized the family's disappearance was not an isolated event. There were records of other disappearances occurring around the mansion, decades before and after that fateful day. Ordinary people, a traveling salesman, a young seamstress, even a priest. None of them left any concrete traces. The coincidence was too disturbing to ignore, and the mansion was always in some way linked to these cases. I spoke with descendants of these victims and heard similar stories. They all disappeared suddenly, for no apparent reason. Some were about to reveal compromising information about powerful local figures. Others simply passed by the property at an inopportune moment. It was as if the mansion were a magnet for tragedies, attracting stories that should never have been written. A silent pattern, but impossible to deny. These connections began to give new depth to the case. The family's disappearance was not just a personal tragedy, but part of a much larger, cyclically repeated plot. The more I compared the accounts, the more I understood that the enigmas lay not only within the walls, but also on the city street. It was as if there were an invisible web connecting the victims, a common thread that escaped the common eye. The question that kept running through my mind was, who was behind this string of disappearances? Was it a curse? A secret society protecting its secrets? Or a powerful enemy operating in the shadows? Each hypothesis seemed plausible, and all led me back to the same conclusion. The answer lay not in the present, but hidden in the mansion's own past. And it was precisely on this trail that I stumbled upon something even more intriguing: a coded map. Among the letters I had already deciphered, one stood out from the rest. Instead of loose phrases and scattered symbols, it featured a curious arrangement of numbers and geometric design. At first, it seemed like just another meaningless riddle. But when I aligned the sheet with an old map of the city, I realized the genius behind it. It was a coded map, pointing not to familiar streets or squares, but to an underground area of the mansion itself. I spent entire nights cross-referencing information. Each number corresponded to a specific measurement, and each symbol indicated a strategic point on the mansion's floor plan. It was as if someone had created a roadmap to guide brave explorers to something hidden from everyone. I couldn't help but smile. It felt like participating in a macabre treasure hunt, where the ultimate prize could be either the truth or a fatal fate. With each detail revealed, My conviction grew that the family had not only disappeared, but had left intentional clues for anyone brave enough to seek them. The map clearly indicated a hidden access behind the cellar, a spot that until then had seemed just another forgotten wine storage facility. I remember my heart racing as I confirmed that the measurements matched exactly what was before me. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the map itself, but the message written in tiny letters in the corner of the page. What lies below should never come to light. A powerful, enigmatic, and provocative phrase. Whoever wrote it knew that the truth was not only dangerous, but forbidden. And with this revelation, there was no turning back. I needed to discover what lurked in the underground chambers of that mansion forgotten by time. Following the map's instructions, I reached the wine cellar. It appeared to be just an ordinary space, with rusty shelves and empty bottles. But something about the floor caught my attention. There was a subtle difference in the stones, as if one of them had been deliberately repositioned. After much effort, I managed to move it, revealing a steep staircase that descended into the bowels of the mansion. It felt like crossing an invisible boundary between the known and the forbidden. The air below was dense, heavy, filled with mold and something I couldn't explain. The stone walls revealed narrow tunnels, lit only by the flashlight trembling in my hand. The silence was so absolute that the sound of my footsteps seemed to echo like thunder. In some places, symbols similar to those I'd encountered before reappeared, carved directly into the stone. This confirmed that the underground was an essential part of the enigma. Further on, the corridors widened, revealing secret rooms. Some were empty, but others held strange objects: ancient Latin books, half-burnt candles, circular markings on the floor reminiscent of rituals. It wasn't just a hiding place. It seemed like a meeting place, a space used repeatedly for purposes no one dared discuss in public. The atmosphere conveyed the distinct sense that something clandestine and powerful was being done there. It was at that moment that I realized the depth of the mystery. The mansion wasn't just the home of an influential family. It was also the center of something much larger, a hidden mechanism that turned in the shadow. And as I explored those corridors, I couldn't help but wonder, did the family disappear because they discovered something they shouldn't have, or did they disappear precisely to protect the secret they kept below? After days of exploring every corner of the mansion and its tunnels, I arrived at what seemed to be the final piece of the puzzle. A letter unlike any other. It was hidden inside a secret compartment in the trunk found in the locked room. The paper was intact, as if it had been preserved on purpose. As I deciphered its lines, my heart raced. The message spoke not of kidnapping nor of crime, but of a planned escape. According to the letter, the family had discovered something so dangerous that it could not be revealed. Instead of facing their enemies head-on, they decided to stage their own disappearance. They created false clues, scattered symbols, and left codes precisely to mislead the curious. The truth is, they were not helpless victims, but authors of a macabre play, masterfully written to deceive even the most attentive eyes. This revelation completely changed the perspective of the investigation. The enigma ceased to be about what happened, and became about what secret could justify such a grandiose performance. What power lay behind symbols, rituals, and embezzled fortunes. It was as if the family had realized they were involved in a larger game of unimaginable proportions, and the only way out was to disappear from view. At that moment, I understood that perhaps the truth would never be fully revealed, because if they'd managed to manipulate every detail of the narrative, who could guarantee that the clues I followed were actually clues, and not just part of the script they'd written for me? That was the real twist. I wasn't just investigating a disappearance. I was an unwitting participant in a plot still unfolding. And worst of all, the final enigma was still open. Even after all the clues were deciphered, codes solved, and secrets revealed, the mansion remained shrouded in an uncomfortable silence. It was as if the walls, witnesses to every detail of the story, knew more than they were willing to tell. I had followed every trail, but in the end, only a nagging feeling remained, that everything was still part of a larger game, one that didn't end with me. The truth, perhaps, was always destined to escape. The case taught me a valuable lesson. Investigation doesn't always yield definitive answers. Sometimes what's uncovered is only the surface of something much deeper.
The family, wherever they were, had achieved what they wanted to disappear on their own terms. And for me, I had to accept that some stories aren't closed, merely archived in the labyrinth of time, waiting for whoever is brave enough to open them again. Even today, when I close my eyes, I can hear the echoes of the mansion, footsteps that weren't mine, voices that couldn't be explained, symbols that seemed to live on even beyond its walls. Perhaps the family survived, perhaps perished. The only certainty is that they left behind an enigma that defies generation, an enigma that continues to beckon investigators, the curious, and even dreamers. And I confess, even after so many years of experience, this is the kind of case that never leaves an investigator's mind. Because whenever I think about closing the case, that nagging question arises. What if there's something else hidden, waiting to be discovered? The enigma of the abandoned mansion didn't end with me. It simply lived on in every person who dares to listen to its stories and lose themselves in them. And now tell me, after everything you've seen, do you believe the family disappeared by accident, or that they wrote with their own hands the perfect script to mislead the entire world? What fascinates me most in these cases is realizing that the greatest enigmas lie not in the walls of the mansion, but in the way we interpret the signs around us. If an entire family was able to manipulate symbols, letters, and even their own absence to create a mystery that lasts generations, what can you do in your life to change the way people perceive you? Have you ever stopped to think if there aren't riddles hidden in your choices, waiting to be deciphered? As a researcher, I've learned that the answer isn't always obvious, but that persistence, curiosity, and courage reveal more than any manual. And perhaps this is the mansion's greatest lesson. Don't accept the first version of the story, but always seek what lies beyond. Apply this to your life at work, in relationships, in your projects, and you'll be surprised by the doors that open. And before we wrap up, I want to invite you, share with me in the comments what you think really happened to this family. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep following, because there are still many more mysteries waiting to be solved together. After all, the investigation never ends. It just changes address.